All right, let's dive in. My name's Lauren Sandeman, and I'm the Operations Director at Envoy for the Nets Out Now campaign. I'm joined today by two incredible scientists, Dr Vanessa Pirotta and Dr Leonardo Guida, to discuss whale entanglements in Australia, in particular shark net entanglements, in light of the event that happened at Coolangatta Beach 3 weeks ago. We want to better educate the public about these events and what happens when they occur to help raise awareness and to create informed perspectives. We have a lot we want to cover, so let's get right into it. Vanessa, why don't you start off by introducing yourself and then we can get to you, Leo.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is a good opportunity to meet people, but also a good opportunity to speak about something really important. So, unfortunately, we would love to be talking about something more positive, but we'll get down that road in just a moment. So, my name is Dr. Vanessa Pirotta. I'm a wildlife scientist. My work is primarily focused in the background of cetaceans, or whales, dolphins, and porpoises. My master's research was focused completely on whale entanglement and looking at ways to try and prevent whale entanglement, which was focused in Australian waters but has worldwide implications and applications. As well as that, I then went on to my PhD, which looked at the use of innovative technologies for wildlife conservation, and that's something I'm continuing to do so throughout my career right now. And some of you may be aware of my research with using drones to collect whale lung bacteria, also known as whale snot. And in addition to that, my work is focused on collaborative science with citizen scientists to learn more about our marine mammal populations, such as the East Coast humpback whale population off Australia, which is our focus primarily today in this discussion. So over to you, Leo.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, Lauren. It's amazing to be in such great company, and it's always a pleasure to have these kind of chats with yourselves and also the broader public. And thank you all for tuning in. Any chance to geek out over wildlife is amazing, and you'll probably have trouble trying to shut me up. So, my name is Dr. Leonardo Guida. I'm a shark scientist by training, and I studied my PhD looking at the effects of commercial fishing and how that impacts shark and ray populations in Australia. Specifically, how stressed out they get and what this means for their survival and also their reproduction. One of my favorite experiments that I did was actually looking at how commercial fishing actually affected the stress in pregnant fiddler rays. And I had this amazing opportunity of watching them go through their pregnancy, giving them ultrasounds and giving birth to these amazing little rays. So following my passion since I was a kid about sharks and rays and having studied my PhD at Monash, I then looked at ways I could translate this research into positive effect on the water, because if you're not aware, over a third of all shark and ray species globally are threatened with extinction. And whilst in Australia we're in a pretty good spot, there's still some problems in our backyard. So I really wanted to help address this issue, largely through the lens of sustainable fishing. And so fortunately enough, in 2018, I was able to join the Australian Marine Conservation Society as a lead of their shark conservation work. And we look at this largely through the lens of sustainable fishing. And as we're familiar with today and the events a few weeks ago, there's an overlap between how humans interact with sharks, what this means for us when we go to the beach, but as we discussed today, also what this means for other wildlife in the water, such as whales and when they unfortunately get entangled in nets.
Awesome. All right. So to get started, Vanessa, do you mind talking a little bit about why whales are along the east coast of Australia at set times of the year?
Yep, I think that's a great starting point, because if you're joining us and you have zero idea about what whales do in Australian waters, this is a good place to start, but also a nice refresher for us all. So essentially, we have two humpback whale populations that primarily visit Australian waters each year. And so they spend the summertime, the austral summertime in Antarctica, primarily feeding. So when we're having our Christmas dinner or lunch, they're in Antarctica doing the same thing. And then they'll switch directions at around the change of season. So we're talking our autumn time, and they'll start making their way along both the west and the east coast of Australia. And they cut this area to do one thing specifically, and that is to breed. So a humpback whale can be pregnant for around 11 to 12 months, and then they'll head to the warmer waters to have their young. Now, we do have evidence of humpback whales having their young in relatively lower waters than those northern waters we're all thinking about, such as Queensland and the Kimberley. So they can, in fact, have their young earlier than those waters. So they'll make their way up, some with young babies. We see them coming off Sydney, and then they'll go to the nice warm waters where they'll hang around, have a bit of a whale nursery, have a whale of a time. The pun had to be in there. And they'll be in those waters to breed. So if some of the other whales that didn't have their young this particular year, for example, they're most likely to have fallen pregnant, and a humpback whale can have a calf every 2 to 3 years. And then once the weather starts becoming a little bit too warm, these animals will then switch directions and head south. And on their way south, we do see opportunistic feeding, although in some cases in our recent publication published this year, we have seen humpback whales feeding en masse in the southern waters off New South Wales, rather, and also in Tasmania. And we've also seen for the very first time the use of bubble net feeding, which is exciting. So this is where whales blow bubbles around their prey and they'll scoop it up. And so that's the first time it's ever been seen in Australian waters, but also huge feeding groups of whales, up to 20 plus in one pod. And then they'll head back down to repeat this same migratory journey each and every year. So it's an annual occurrence that the whales are visiting Australian waters, and it's an annual occurrence that we're likely to see them interacting with us as humans. So this is a reminder for us as scientists each and every year that we need to do our very best to look after them. And we have fortunately been doing that with this population recovering very well post-whaling. And this is something we can talk about a little bit later in this discussion. So that's just a basic biology 101 of the humpback whales in Australian waters.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I guess kind of following on that topic of interactions with humans, Leo, what do whales face when they have to navigate down the east coast of Australia pertaining to shark control equipment?
Yeah, so well, firstly, Vanessa, like that just blew my mind. Like I thought sharks were cool. So whales,
Sharks are cool, thank you, Leo.
whales are up there now. The bubble net feeding, that's impressive.
That's cool.
Actually, I think Vanessa coined this phrase, and I've used it a couple times because I think it's brilliant. I think it really illustrates what they do, and that is the Humpback Highway. So I'll give credit to you, Vanessa, for that one there.
I'm also giving credit to others because we've all come to the agreement that it is a great term because there's lots of them, they're humpbacks, and it just works quite well.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's exactly that. So it's this East Coast stretch where whales are coming up and down en masse each year like clockwork. And unfortunately, what that means is that with the way the current shark control system is designed in Queensland predominantly, and also in New South Wales to an extent, is that there are gill nets spread out across the water with the intention of catching sharks and preventing human interactions. But unfortunately, what that also means is that, again, to use a highway example, it's like stringing a net across a highway. And these whales probably unlikely are going to be able to see these nets. Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. So what that means is as these whales swim closer to shore in the relatively safe, calm, easy waters, they're going to interact with these nets. And as we've seen recently, and also as we've seen last year and in previous years, it can be quite stressful for these animals. So we really have to look at solutions that not only prevent whales from getting entangled, but also solutions that really improve beach safety of the water, beach safety. So we've got a few solutions in the works. And when I say we, I mean a range of talented scientists. And also, the New South Wales government, for example, starting to employ or have been employing the use of drones for quite some time now. And that's quite promising as to how that's working. And as we saw last year, Queensland for the first time trialled drones as well. There's also use of electrical shark deterrents, which WA uses quite extensively and also offers a rebate. And fortunately enough, in Queensland, we recently heard that they're going to be starting some shark deterrent trials in Queensland waters as well. So there are some really great solutions out there, albeit technical, but there are education components as well that we can speak to. But I suppose the take-home message is that without having nets in the water, we reduce impacts to wildlife, not just whales, but other wildlife as well. And we can look at other options that help us enjoy the water a lot more safely and really appreciate just the sheer variety and amazing wildlife that we have in our waters.
And on that, Leo, I will add that I guess one of the things that we need to remember with, especially as a scientist, and you see this with the work that you do, whales and all marine animals are living in the ocean, and us as humans, we have extending our arms out from being on land, but also in the sea. So as a result, one of the things that scientists work really hard to do is try and manage these interactions with human-wildlife interactions. And so from a whale scientist perspective, and well, I should say from everyone's perspective, nobody wants to see any sort of entanglement happen, whether it be a scientist, the whale, fishers. You even think about a ship strike. So ship strike is another thing that can happen to whales. So we have vessels moving, small powerboats moving into the water where these whales are likely to coexist. I led a research paper which looks at the impact of shipping globally, looking at marine giants, and that also covers basking sharks and whale sharks, because these animals are susceptible to this type of activity because they're surface active. They come to the surface to bask in the sun, and you can talk more to the biology around sharks, Leo. But for whales, they need to come to the surface to breathe. So this makes them vulnerable. And so a lot of the time is spent trying to mitigate some of these interactions. And so what's really a great opportunity here, and to tell you all watching from wherever you're watching around the world, is this is a great opportunity to explore some of the positive ways forward to look at science, communication, and some of the cool things that we can do collaboratively to try and mitigate or prevent some of these interactions. And I must point out as well, another thing is whales are incredibly curious creatures. So there might be people going, well, why are they getting entangled, or why does this happen? Whales can be entangled in a variety of gear, whether it be shark nets, long lines, single gear fishing type scenarios like lobster or crab pots, or even, as we saw the other day, fads, which is a fishing aggregation device. They're inquisitive, and some animals will like to go up to things and explore, whether it be very tactile, so using their arm, or maybe something's taken them by surprise and they want to investigate. So there's a whole thing that we need to work around, both being in the same place at the same time, overlapping in an environment, but also that curiosity and behavior of the whales. So there's a number of things in play as to why we see these interactions. And as you can imagine, and as you can see and hear from my tone and voice, it's overwhelming at times. And ways forward is definitely something positive, and a positive implication and a positive way forward that we can all discuss here today, which is something I'm just so passionate about. So thank you for the platform, I should say.
No, you're more welcome. I guess getting down a bit more into the nitty gritty is what some people I don't think understand is what actually happens during a whale entanglement. Like, why are they so stressful? Why are they so bad? Why do they last for so long in some cases?
Well, that's a really good question. So entanglement can be, so there's no good entanglement, in my opinion. That's my opinion. Whale entanglement can be really, there can be a lot less severe cases or some really severe cases. And we've seen recently a very severe case. When a whale is entangled, they are compromised in their movement. So an animal might have its pectoral or its arm entangled, or it might have its tail entangled. There might be rope around its whole body. It just depends. And it also depends on the gear as well. So the type of fishing gear or type of there could be ghost nets as well. So this is nets that have served their purpose and now they're floating around, or it could be anchor line. That happened to our vessel the other day, which is not good. So pollution in the ocean is big and small. But an animal can be entangled for a period of time. So some animals might be entangled for a short period of time and able to disentangle themselves. That's a great outcome. Or there could be entanglement cases that we've seen the other day, which of that FAD, the fishing aggregation device, where there were trained personnel, and we can get onto that very shortly as to what happens in a disentanglement. That was really, animal was able to be disentangled and swim away. Or there can be really severe entanglements, such as the recent entanglement off Queensland, where an animal was dragging line and gear for a period of time, and there was chain apparently on that gear. And so as an animal tries to move away from the potential entanglement, it's almost like you're being stuck or you're putting your jumper on. It's annoying until you can get your arms through. But for whales, they can't sort of do that in some cases. And so over a period of time, that line or whatever gear is around them can potentially embed into their skin. Now, the whales that aren't able to have their line removed, that can embed and it can cause infection, can prevent them from diving, can prevent them from doing other things such as reproducing or even eating, and in some cases even breathing. And as a result, if an animal doesn't die of drowning, and I have seen entanglements where animals have drowned, they may die of infection, or there's a whole host of other things that could lead to a really terrible outcome. But there is there is a huge amount of resources that does go into trying to disentangle these animals, which is a positive thing. And the people who do that really, in most cases, are risking their lives, because people who have disentangled whales, and I've known many experts in one particular overseas who has actually died doing this. So it's a very serious thing when an animal is distressed and in need of assistance.
I guess let's dive a little bit into that. With some of the rescue footage we saw, a lot of people who viewed it and commented were really frustrated at the rescue teams to do something along the lines of just jump in and cut the lines, or just get a saw hacker or something and get in there and do it themselves. Can you elaborate a little bit more as into why that's not necessarily the case, that the solutions aren't as straightforward as a lot of people seem to think?
Oh, I wish it was as simple as you just go get in there and help out, but it's not that simple. And I sympathize with the people who are very frustrated and want to dive in with a knife between their teeth. It doesn't always happen like that. And whales are really big. They're as big as a bus, and when they're little, they're as big as your car. These animals can potentially hurt you severely, and in some cases kill you. And if an animal has line or stressed and is fatigued, really tired, their level of reaction it will be measurable. But the people who disentangle these animals go through a huge amount of training. It doesn't just happen overnight. You can't just have 5 minutes of a classroom Zoom lesson and then you're done. You have to go through a series of training. So how to use equipment, how to wear PPE, personal protective equipment. So you see the people wearing helmets and eye protection. They're using knives. So they've got special hooks it's a special little hook that goes around the net. You don't want to unhook a whale and then deflate your boat. So there's all these things. You've got to know how to drive around a whale. You've got to know how to work in sea conditions that are not favorable. You can't just wait for a glorious sunshiny day to go out and do a whale entanglement. There's all these things that need to come into play, and people doing it must be trained and have the authority to do so. Otherwise, you risk not only stressing the animal out more, but also potentially becoming a victim of entanglement.
Jesus. All right. Yeah, that's shocking. I guess it's never really as straightforward as people see, and so people get so frustrated because they don't really understand the whole picture, and that of course gets channeled through to just when you see these prolonged entanglements like we saw in Coolangatta on the 11th, is that people just can't understand why they take so long, and they get extended, people get more and more frustrated, the conditions get worse. And so I guess that segues a lot more into talking specifically about what happened on the 11th with the Coolangatta entanglement. And Leo, are you able to talk a little bit about what actually happened over those 2 days?
Yeah, so I remember it was in the morning when I woke up, and my routine is wake up, go to gym, come back, have some breakfast, put the coffee on, Italian coffee, by the way, only Italian coffee, and sit in front of the news and just get the daily download of what's been happening. And straight away there was Gold Coast whale entanglement, and I went, oh, right, today's going to be a busy one. And so I follow the news as I do, and I read up the articles and tried to follow as many updates. And what we learnt was that it was first spotted at about 6:30 in the morning, and it was called in. And it's great that the public are out there watching, and that they're able to call into the Queensland Fisheries Department or even SeaWorld to get the teams out there as quick as possible to go rescue these animals. And I will stress that, like, people do these, as Vanessa said, they're highly trained, and they do get out there as soon as they can. It's, whilst from the coast it might look like it's flat and it's easy and it's a beautiful sunshine day, logistics, weather conditions, and how the water moves can ultimately impact the times people get out there. So it's, as Vanessa said, it's not as simple as it often looks. But to their credit, they got out there as soon as they could. Unfortunately, what we saw unfold was that the whale entanglement was quite severe and quite complex. And so I think the weather conditions on the day were a little off as well. And unfortunately, throughout the entire day, they couldn't get the whale free. And they actually had to, as light was diminishing, they had to leave. And again, I'll stress, as Vanessa said, like, they need massive amounts of training. It's extremely dangerous. And the last thing you want to do is be doing this when you've got low light levels. It's bad for the animal in case you injure the animal with the boat or the tools that you're using, and also bad for the people trying to do it, because the last thing you want is more injury and more tragedy. So it was left overnight. My immediate concern, it being left overnight, being the shark nerd that I am, I was like, great, stressful animal, heading into nighttime, sharks are probably going to pick up on this, or they might pick up on this, and this whale may or may not be easy pickings. Because for sharks, whales are a floating buffet. Like, it's a rare opportunity for a shark to be able to, sorry, Vanessa, we might have a little bit of a fisticuffs over this, but it's a rare opportunity for sharks to actually get a really dense, energy-rich, nutritious meal for the blubber. And once sharks have had their feed, that whale then feeds an entire ecosystem.
Yep.
Then small fish come in and the whale falls down to the bottom and then microbes get at it. So it's quite a natural process. So my thinking was, this whale is going to be really stressed. Sharks are probably going to pick up on it because of their senses and, you know, their evolution, and it's a floating buffet. It's like you walking past, think of your favorite food, but like just in front of you, ready for the picking. It's going to be hard to resist. So I was like, oh, great. I hope this doesn't happen. But then I thought, people should know that if they intend on surfing really early in the morning, within that area, not necessarily near the whale, but within that area, all of a sudden the risk profile is elevated with a shark interaction. So it was left overnight. I had my concerns, and then again next morning followed my same ritual, had my coffee, put on the news, and we learned that the whale was now 30 nautical miles off the Tweed coast. Nautical miles from memory are about 1.6, 1.8. So for easy math, let's just say double. So it's about 60 k's offshore. And the good thing was, okay, the whale seems to be in reasonably healthy, reasonably strong because it's able to do that. But at the same time, you also go, it also probably exerted a lot of energy to be able to do that. So the team, again, went out there as soon as they could, as soon as the conditions allowed them. And fortunately enough, they were able to get most of the gear off. The unfortunate part about it was, and again, this speaks to the safety element. It's not that they did a half-assed job. It's very much a safety concern. They did the best they could, but unfortunately the whale, from all reports and from what we saw from footage being shown through, is that the buoys and some of the buoys were deflated. And the reason why the buoys were deflated, again, is less drag for the animal, so it requires less energy to move through the water. But unfortunately, those buoys were still attached to the net and still attached to the whale. So I don't know what happened to the whale. I couldn't say what happened to the whale other than it unfortunately wasn't the perfect release. And the whale probably, hopefully, is still alive. But nonetheless, it's having to exert more energy than what it can to normally swim. And I might pass on to Vanessa to probably explain what their energy budget's like, how they use energy, how important is energy, how often they feed, and what this might mean for, I suppose, how quickly it can get to Antarctica and kind of recoup that energy loss.
Yeah, well, that's a great perspective, because if I just go back to what you said about the animal overnight, I love the fact that there's that shark component, because the only thing I was thinking of is this animal will hopefully have a rest overnight. With a satellite tracker has been put on the animal or the gear, so we know where it is the next day. Hopefully this animal has a bit of a rest or logging at the surface, but I didn't think of that other component. So yeah, that's great. It's funny what the different scientists think of, and I love it. That's why collaboration is so exciting. Look, I guess when anyone attends an entanglement, number one thing is what type of entanglement is it? And often when the trained specialists going to the animal will only find out when they're right there at the time. And I know in this case, drones were also quite effective in looking at the overall picture to tell the people disentangling what's the case here, how entangled is the animal. So in that case, that animal, in what I've heard, it wasn't fully disentangled, which is, unfortunately, we all want a really good outcome where the animal's completely free. But what was really good is that there was a really good effort placed into disentangling that animal. And so the animal, after that effort, was able to dive and swim a little bit more freely, which is a good thing. It's the best result that could have happened in that case. Now, in terms of how much or how entangled the animal still currently is, it would be, we're only a couple of weeks on, it would probably still be entangled. Or if some miracle happened where the animal was able to disentangle itself, although in this case it sounds very extreme, the animal is most likely still swimming around. If it has unfortunately succumbed to infection. So it may have had the gear now on its body for a couple of weeks now. That blubber, although it's we're talking blubber, it's quite thick. Their first layer of skin is quite thin, and you can, if you ever felt a dolphin or a whale, their skin comes off quite easily. So there's probably a lot of tearing into the skin. I don't know if this animal would have infection right now. It's too hard to sort of say exactly what's happening. This is my science hat going, oh, don't speculate too much, just it could be this or it could be that. In terms of its energy budget, these animals primarily feed in Antarctica, as I've spoken about, but they will opportunistically feed in certain areas. So we've been seeing it off the south coast. There may potentially be feeding off Queensland. I would not put it past a whale to see if there's a nice krill swarm or if there's fish for it to have a bit of a snack. In terms of this animal, though, feeding, if it's able to feed properly, let's hope that it will have an opportunity to do so. But this animal generally won't feed until it heads back down to Antarctica for its really good time to do that. So let's hope, if this is the case for this whale, that it will rely on those energy stores to facilitate that transition down south. This is me being really optimistic. If it gets to a point where it's not able to do what it could do freely, then this animal will unfortunately be declining in body condition, where it will become thinner and thinner. And unfortunately, towards the end of the day, whenever that day might happen, it may die as a result. And I will point in a bit of kudos to the sharks. I really, after seeing a whale, if you see an animal floating at the surface, some animals die of natural causes, that's what happens. Seeing sharks predate on a dead whale carcass is really interesting, and it's a reminder that sharks play important ecological roles in the marine environment. So whales, sharks interacting together, it's an interesting thing, and it's also a reminder again that whales play important ecological roles as well as the sharks by feeding in one area and pooing in another, and then when they die, they provide food and nutrients for the vacuum cleaners of the sea, which are the sharks, and then that whale fall going down to the different ecosystem levels. So in short, I know I've gone really wide, but let's hope that this animal is still able to do its thing, swim, and can make it down south again to feed adequately.
Well, I just have so many questions I want to elaborate on and get your opinions on just from this discussion. But the first two that come to my mind, I guess, from what you're talking about, Leo, regarding the whale overnight, was there a warning put out to surfers or notification about this increased risk activity happening at local beaches? If not, is there an opportunity in the future for maybe to improve this kind of outreach to inform communities about interactions with the oceans?
Fantastic questions. Well, just the first one, and that was, I think, in short, was there a warning put out overnight, just with the elevated risk of possibly sharks? I genuinely can't recall, but what we do know is that in WA, for example, and in New South Wales, when they do track sharks or when there is an event of a whale carcass or anything like that, they're generally pretty good at putting out an alert. And through the media and so forth. With this particular case, I just genuinely can't recall. But I thought the onus was on me, given the role that I have and my knowledge. It was like, okay, well, the onus is on me to actually put out that PSA anyway. And even if it means one person goes, oh, actually, I might not go surfing at dawn this morning, my job done. And so, but it's a really important thing you mentioned, because this also feeds back into that strategy about, how can we improve beach safety without necessarily having shark nets in there? And so with the case of the whale entanglement, one aspect is public service announcements. Forgive me, I think was there another part to that question? I can't recall.
How can we kind of foster that interaction and education regarding human-ocean interactions in the future to make it more clear or clarify things for people who don't necessarily understand that risk factors change in these environments?
Yeah, 100%. So for starters, everyone listening right now, this is one step in terms of, speaking to scientists and engaging in the process. I suppose the other more formal step, and again, New South Wales and WA do this, and Queensland has now got their own Shark Smart program, and they're making steps towards a community-based education program. I know in New South Wales, for example, this includes beach huts unfortunately not at the moment because of COVID, but at least when everyone was out and about on the beaches, there were beach huts and they'd give displays and they'd talk to people about sharks, their behaviours. So people got a sense of what the risk factors were. And these were anything from, like, if you see seagulls dipping into the water, it's probably a sign that there's a bait ball. If there's a bait ball, probably going to be sharks, because again, it's this vibrant ecosystem. It's the ocean doing its thing. It's the ocean working. These are good signs. But they're also signs to be aware of that, okay, perhaps I might not take the risk today, and instead I'll just enjoy the fact that we're living in a place where we've got relatively healthy oceans. So there's those elements there. There's formal community education programs. And through those programs, like I said, we can learn more about bait balls. We can learn more about, seagulls diving. We can learn more about, surfing near river mouths when there's been heavy rainfall in the past few days, because we know that bull sharks love hanging around rivers after there's been quite a lot of rainfall. And so, yes, again, the positive thing is that the science is being able to communicate this knowledge more effectively. Government departments and Department of Fisheries are actively working to disseminate this information. Whilst in some cases it's not perfect, the great thing is it's happening. And the onus is on us as scientists and conservationists to support that and to make sure that it does get better and better. And so that way there, again, going back to the whole whale thing overnight, the idea is that a message gets put out and then people go, okay, I'm aware of the situation, I'm aware of my environment that I'm in. Which behaviours do I intend on undertaking, whether that's surfing at dawn or whether that's just kicking back on the beach? It's entirely up to the individual. But suffice to say that with more information, with more awareness, people can be safer at the beach and undertake actions to which way they prefer.
And I'll add on that, Leo, because Lauren, I would say Leo is very taking a very precautionary approach, a cautious approach, which is good in terms of the whale entangled overnight if it does succumb to passing or it is predated upon with sharks. That would be a very cautious approach. So when we know of a whale that has died and they're hanging out offshore and the carcass is brought in and we don't know the reason why it may have died. As I said before, some whales die of illness or old age. As they die, a lot of gases and the juices that come out of the body, I'm a biologist, so I really like talking about this stuff. It gets really juicy and it can create all those environmental cues to bring sharks in. So where Leo's thinking, bing, 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 we need to let people know. And that's exactly right. We need to let people know when that happens, because if you're a surfer or a swimmer, we would advise not to be in the water. And generally that does happen. But in the case for this whale, it could have been a precautionary approach that one could take. And so that's where Leo's skills and expertise comes in, which is great. But in terms of this, I suppose that the people watching us now are probably the converted. They're very ocean aware. They love whales. They love sharks. And maybe they don't like whales. Doesn't matter. I won't offend you. Be offended as well. And so I guess the thing is awareness, and that's what's so important. Leo and myself, we've spent years in books and in the field and learning from people above us about the environment. We don't have all the answers to the questions that you might have. We don't know everything. We'll never pretend to know everything. But what we do have is this understanding of how to communicate the technical side of science. And that's really important and very timely, especially when you talk about these kind of subject matters, because it's really important for us as scientists to work with different stakeholders, to work with the community, to work with people that may have never have heard of shark nets or whales or sharks in the ocean before, and they just stumbled across us today watching this. Whether it's communication is really important, and an understanding of our ocean and how things work. Like, there are sharks in the ocean. There are sharks there because they play their ecosystem role to regulate certain fish species, and the levels in which they do it is really important. And this all has implications for us as people who consume seafood, whether you love a prawn or some sort of oyster, you get where I'm going there. And so it does affect us, but it is also important for us as a scientist to manage these interactions in a positive way and a way forward. And this is what's so exciting with the science, because we can use cool technology to learn more about shark movements, for example, and whale movements through tagging these animals, and also through ways in which it can help prevent, or at least interactions, or minimize interactions in the ocean. But ultimately, going into the ocean, I always have this respect that I'm hopping into someone else's house now. I'll enjoy it, and I'll be very respectful.
No, brilliant. I guess following on from that, messaging about communication, I guess with the Coolangatta entanglement, the teams did their best efforts with, quite a horrible entanglement. But the communication pertaining to the rescue being a successful rescue was perhaps a little bit misleading to the general public who weren't aware of the full extent of the whale remaining entangled. And I guess the question is, you're not always going to have a success story or win in these events or in marine conservation in general. And we know this as scientists, but not necessarily as the general member of the public. Why is the communication around these events and these circumstances so tailored more towards trying to present something that not necessarily represent the full picture of the events? Why do people hesitate to communicate that, the rescue teams did their best, but it still wasn't a fully successful release? Why does it have to be a win or a lose scenario in terms of the messaging from these bigger institutions around these events?
I would say, I'll jump in here. I would say the media has, and probably sensationalized it a little bit here. So I recall one live cross where it's a great end of the story. This is the end. I would say it's probably the end of them covering it for that day. And we need the media to communicate this type of information, which is really important. And kudos to the media in terms of disseminating information, of connecting people from different stakeholders to help towards the disentanglement of a whale. At the end of the day, look, the human safety will be prioritized in a disentanglement effort. And in that case, these people disentangling this whale, they worked incredibly hard. It's incredibly emotional and exhausting within disentanglement scenario. Being at sea, even if you're at sea to do whale drone research, it's tiring. You're at sea, it's moving. I can only imagine what it would be to be like to disentangle an animal. It's physical. You're working in close proximity to people. They went offshore really, really far. So I would say that the animal was, in the time in which they returned back was probably late at night. They did the best they could for that day. They did a huge effort. The animal, unfortunately, probably wouldn't be able to be relocated without another tag. Maybe there wasn't a position to be with putting a tag on the animal. We can't speculate this. We simply only know the information that we know. But what we do know, which is a good thing, is that efforts were undertaken to try and help that animal. And us as humans did it to the best of our ability in that scenario.
What I'd also say, and this I suppose speaks more broadly to, and again, as scientists, we're very fortunate in the sense that we've had drilled into us how to critically analyze and read information and look for the gaps and the nuances and put the pieces together. And that can take years of training. So what I would also recommend to people whenever they read news articles is, and I'm guilty of this as well, where you just read the headline and you go, okay, cool, successful release, no dramas, awesome, great. But if you take a few minutes and just breathe and go, okay, cool, let's read the story and let's see what the rescue team had to say and let's see what the department said and let's see what the scientists said. And I know, for example, in the ABC article, they were saying it was a successful release in as much as it could be successful, but unfortunately some of the gear was still left on. These are the details that are often, not just in this story, but I suppose in any reporting of any story, it's the details that are right in the middle of the article. And just human behavior being human behavior, like people will read the headline, maybe the first paragraph, skip down to the bottom, and that's it. And the real meat and the detail can often be lost. So I would encourage anyone who does follow up on stories like this, or any story really that you want to know more information, take the time to read the details, follow some of the breadcrumbs, and you can get a better understanding of what's happened. So my view on it is, it was, like Vanessa was saying, it's a successful release in as much as it could be successful, factoring in human safety, factoring in just logistics and what you can physically do. But then also understanding the details, you then go, well, it wasn't a purely successful release in the sense that they did acknowledge that there was still gear left on this whale.
I guess going on from that, people are so passionate about whales and smaller community to sharks as well. But what can we do as a nation, as individuals in Australia, to better protect whales and other, like whales in particular, to stop these entanglements from even occurring? Like, what can the average person do to help? Because people are so passionate about helping, but they don't necessarily know what they can do if they're not a scientist or directly involved in these teams.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. That's a good question. And ultimately, the answer to solving everyone's problems would be to remove nets and fishing gear throughout the entire ocean. Remembering that entanglement is not just an Australian problem. Unfortunately, it is a global problem. And there are some species of whales where entanglement is limiting their recovery post whaling. So that is really sobering. So I would say for the average person, well, the average person is probably not you watching us at home because you have an interest in this and you want to know more. So I guess having that discussion and raising awareness around the fact that we have animals in our marine environment, and some of the human activities that we do, whether it be entanglement or ship strike or acoustic pollution, so noise, or microplastics or runoff, things that you put down your sink can go out into the marine environment. Us as humans, unfortunately, we do have an impact on the ecosystem in the ocean, which affects not just whales, but sharks and all these other animals. So we need to be more aware. So for the people who know about this, having a general discussion, whether it be a school project or having a dinner table conversation, it's not drilling into people. It's rather just having a positive discussion and being more aware of our actions. And while we all can't prevent these problems such as global ship strike or global entanglement, what we can do is make sure that our actions on land are minimizing what we do. So, for example, it might be something simple as not releasing a balloon into the sky when you have a party, when you can have a party. And you're probably thinking, oh, that's really an extreme case. But it is. I often see balloons out on the ocean when I'm doing whale research, and they float out to the ocean. Or using a reusable not a plastic bag rather, but a reusable bag from the supermarket. They're the small things that are a bit more achievable that you can do to help these animals. Because if we've already got gear in the ocean and it's accumulating, it's not good for animals. They don't need any more additive impacts that you and I can create, which is not a good thing. As well as that, us moving forward as scientists trying to look at alternatives, or at least ways in which we can try and prevent entanglement specifically. And my entire master's was focused on just that, where we used acoustic devices placed on fishing gear type scenarios, such as like a lobster pot or a crab pot, so the single type scenarios, or very much like a FAD, fishing aggregation device, where we would hopefully acoustically alert whales to fishing gear presence. But our research and the research that I was doing, which looked at tracking whale movements past this device, both when the alarm was on and off, and I was blind, I didn't know if the alarm was on or off, showed that the whales unfortunately didn't deter away from being acoustically alerted to the fishing gear presence. So they're little things that we can learn from and move forward to try and look at other alternatives. So maybe the way in which the lines or the fishing gear looks, so the color of it, or maybe not placing these items in the Humpback Whale Highway, which unfortunately there'll be people who relying on fishing industries as a livelihood. These people will coexist with animals, and I would imagine that they as well don't want entanglement to happen. So it's all about moving forward together to look at positive solutions to try and minimize this activity. But you at home, your actions on land really do have an impact in the ocean, and trying to minimize those is the key take-home message.
Yeah, brilliantly said, Vanessa. And to expand on the whole collaborative effort and awareness, some other things you can do, like particularly if you live in a beachside community, is have a conversation with your surf club, have a conversation with your fishing club, even have a conversation with some of your local members, but have that conversation of like, hey, I'm such and such, and this is what, like, I think, what solutions can we work towards here? And having that collaborative approach means that everyone ends up on that same page and wanting to move forward. Again, it's about raising awareness. It's about having that conversation with people in your community. And I know that New South Wales has done this. I know that Queensland, I think Queensland has done this or is looking at it. But regardless, like a lot of local communities also put out formal surveys because they really want to understand what people think and how they feel about the environment they're in so that they can best tailor solutions for everyone. So take part in these surveys. I mean, what you say does matter. And the clearer picture we get about everyone's awareness and about what they think needs to happen means that resources and efforts can be put in the appropriate places. And as Vanessa said, we can move forward with the best knowledge that we have available at the time.
No, what you say does matter. I think that's probably the key takeaway I'm going to take from this. And I think a lot of people at home should say using your voice and to generate change and to keep these discussions happening so that we can learn to coexist with nature is the best outcome we can look for going forward. Now, I think that will probably leave it there. I want to say thank you to both of you for coming. This discussion was incredible. I hope you guys at home took something away from this. I definitely did. So thank you for your time and for coming into this discussion. And we'll see you, I guess, talk to you next time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
watching.